I've been keeping an eye on Manor Lords. How many in chat have been keeping an eye on Manor Lords? This is one of the most wishlisted, if not the most wishlisted game on Steam right now. People are super stoked on it. Very excited about it. And Bellular News posted a video saying the Manor Lords developer is rightly worried. Worried about what, me lord? Pray tell.
Dev of a much hyped game must be a very stressful experience. What's happening now is that Steam's #1 wishlisted game is coming out next week. The game we're talking about here is Manor Lords, and yeah, it's the most wishlisted.
What happened to that other really good game that was the most wishlisted one? What happened to it? I thought it was awesome. I already forgot what it was called. It's taking me the day before. That whole thing I just did was me trying to buy time while I could try to think of what that was called. It took me that long. It's already left my brain. I think I've just started to black it out and forget about it because I don't want to, my brain doesn't want to have to think about it.
Game on Steam right now, and because of that, the solo developer behind it kind of needs players to take a little bit of a listen. Essentially, he's posted saying that Manor Lords may not be what everybody is hoping for. Of course, what is that about? Is that about the expectations that he has set, or is it about how Manor Lords has just been an absolute organic marketing hit to the point where everybody in their mind's eye can see a massive wealth of possibilities in the game? And it's been an amazing time. The developer Slavic Magic, I mean, #1 maybe must have had some access to Slavic Magic given how impressive an effort Manor Lords is for a team of that size. But what's happened is it's soared up to the top of Steam's wish lists. It's actually been approached by Microsoft for a Game Pass deal, which, by the way, is a very rare thing. They have dried up that money pot so much. So yeah, getting a Game Pass deal in the modern environment is actually quite the achievement. But of course, all of this is because of its humongous popularity. And then you've got to think about why, and you've got to think about what's broadly going on. #1, this is coming out into early access. #2, as a part of all of the sort of pre-launch marketing beats, a lot of creators who have got pretty strong audiences are looking into this game, you know, like.
Yeah, because it looks awesome. It looks awesome. I do think I do not envy people in this. Well, actually I do. Never mind. I am jealous because on the one hand, they're about to make a ton of money when this thing drops. Clearly. So that's awesome. And I do envy them. But beyond that, the stresses involved with it, I'm sure, are overwhelming. Like overwhelming. Because everybody is looking at this game hoping to get certain things out of it. And there's some people that have false expectations. There's some people that are overly hyped and don't understand the limitations of what can and can't be done. And, you know, as a developer, I'm sure it's just like, no, listen, this is what the game is. This is what we've got. Play it and enjoy it. But if it's not got the things you want, just don't buy it. You don't need to buy it. It's not what you're looking for. I'm sure the stresses involved with this are nightmarish. Beyond that, what we've seen with No Rest for the Wicked also is that it seems like there's a big misunderstanding with a lot of gamers out there on what early access actually means. Because No Rest for the Wicked dropped in early access as well. And a lot of people started complaining that it felt like things were missing, or it felt like the game wasn't fully optimized and this was crazy and unacceptable and all that. But like, guys, it's early access. The access you have gotten has been granted early, before it's technically done. It is a way that developers can get some cash to help finish development and push it across the finish line. That's what early access is for. It's not a finished product that's polished and refined to the full 1.0 release, which is why they bring it out in early access, to get fan feedback, to get funds and all of that. But when people stop to understand the difference between early access and full releases, you're in trouble, because people are just going to freak out over it. Yeah, that's bad PC ports fatigue. All right. Yeah, Kinemansky, and I think it's fair to be fatigued by how many crappy PC ports we've gotten in the last 2 years, which is a lot. Dare I say, a plethora. But it doesn't change the fact that early access is pitched at the outset as an incomplete product. That's what it is. It's not supposed to be a finished product. Otherwise, it wouldn't be early access. It would just be access. So I'm sure that these guys are having to, like, they're just stressing, trying to make sure this is framed properly so people don't get the wrong idea or expect something from it that they're not going to get.
Like, say, your Resonance, your Legend of Total Wars, many others, and a lot of this does speak to the interesting Venn diagrams that this game finds itself in. Because yes, there is exactly what it is, right? But also, if you're a Total War fan, well, you're looking at the combat in this game and thinking, my god, I have had so many combat criticisms of Total War in the last while, I am interested. Maybe you like city builders. I mean, they've had an ongoing renaissance, but maybe your time isn't being eaten up by City Skylines 2, and maybe now you're just thinking, okay, well, this game looks pretty interesting, and it's in my Venn diagram. And that means we've got a situation where a game with realistically a tiny budget as compared to Total War or City Skylines 2, or really a lot of its contemporaries, it is competing with them. And that's one of the interesting things about small indie disruptors. The entire point of a small indie disruptor is that it is competing while it almost definitionally cannot be comparable because of a complete asymmetry in resources. So to try—
And I do think that most of this lands on timing, because as he points out, right now City Skylines players are pissed because their game that they got they got the big ass sequel. It still runs like absolute garbage. It's like they're still releasing DLC for it that's overpriced and under polished and really lacking in variety and content. Like City Skylines players are pretty peeved. And then Total War players have been peeved for a very long time. And whatever the studio is, I can never remember the name of the studio, but the studio behind Total War has been just blowing it. And they're one of the most, like, not even, I don't think at that point it's even like the standard definition of greedy. People throw out greedy so casually nowadays that it doesn't really mean anything. And it kind of drives me crazy because it's like there are really greedy examples of games or of studios. And I think the guys behind Total War are the prime example. I mean, if you've never looked at how these games are monetized, look at this. So like this is Creative Assembly, that's it. So Creative Assembly, they do all of these games. So the recent one was like Pharaoh. They lowered the price to 40. But like these things are so crazy filled with, like, if we do Warhammer 3, just like all the DLC, all the expansions, all the little things, it's wild. And this is for a single player game. And they're locking armies behind, they're locking factions behind these things. They're launching different model types, all sorts of stuff. It's crazy. So the full game, you're not even really getting for the price you're paying. And like, it's a cool concept. It makes sense, like have different armies locked behind different price points, but it has driven the fans absolutely crazy. So a lot of these people are disenfranchised too. And I think that's where timing comes in, where if you can come along and offer a decent alternative at a good price around the same time, those people will go and have fun, you know, that because they're just looking for something else to try, which is all they're hoping for. It's all you really need.
Try to cut through all of this and make sure that we do not have a No Man's Sky shaped launch. The developer has made a big old post on Steam. And to be honest, I'm just interested in this situation, but also I do think it's worth getting the word out here. Here's what he said, and I'm just going to quote here. What this game is not. Manor Lords is not a Total War competitor. It is a city builder with battles. Yes, battles are there, but not as huge or frequent as some of you might expect. The majority of gameplay is focused on city building and management. It is not an empire management style grand strategy game. The map has regions, but you won't be able to conquer the whole of Europe, nor have marriages or anything like that. The game is designed to play at a much smaller scale. It's not a role-playing game either. If you've played Kingdom Come Deliverance or Mount & Blade, Manor Lords is a different type of game. There is a visit mode in Manor Lords that allows you to walk around your town, but it's an experimental cosmetic bonus feature. The game is meant to be played from a bird's eye perspective, like a strategy game almost always should. There won't be any first-person gameplay. It's not a competitive, fast-paced RTS like Age of Empires or StarCraft, so maybe, I mean, if you're someone like me and you just wanted to hold out, you know, to hold fast against the massive wave of Britlings, can't do it. I mean, a bunch of dudes, but I don't know. I don't think anybody really expected this to be like Age of Empires or StarCraft, but
you better believe if he's having to respond to these points and write them out, he's gotten emails, he's gotten questions about it. I'm sure there's been people that have been like, oh no, I bet there's going to be this and that. I hope there's this and that. Maybe there is this and that, but they just haven't mentioned it because it's a super cool reveal that they're going to wait on until closer to launch or whatever. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. Like the fact that he had to bring up Kingdom Come Deliverance for what is clearly a city sim game, like a medieval city sim management game, is crazy. But I'm sure it's because he said people reach out and are expecting games of a similar type or features of a similar type. And it's the danger of hype, again, is that it just makes you sound like a crazy person, which is what these people are doing. They're like asking for Kingdom Come Deliverance level features from a tiny studio that's putting out like basically a city sim. Like, what are you talking about? But this is what people do when they just start to spin and spin and spin. Yeah, and I appreciate the transparency. Big studios would run with it to milk the franchise. Yeah. No, he's trying to get ahead of it, because if people buy it and they're expecting a Kingdom Come Deliverance mode in addition to a city builder and stuff, they're going to be pretty disappointed because they were acting crazy.
To me, somebody probably was comparing this to Age of Empires, and that's probably why the dev has felt they've had to write this paragraph. But anyway, he goes on to say, a lot of the game mechanics focus on aesthetics of your town, and resources take some time to be transported around the map. This results mostly in more of a relaxed experience with high intensity moments spicing up atmospheric city building rather than the game being high intensity all of the time. That to me sounds completely reasonable as a disclaimer, and frankly, after him saying all of those things, I am more excited about the game, because in a way, if you define something by what it isn't, that can tell you a lot about what it is, and what his disclaimer tells me the game is through the lens of what it is not is exactly what I want from a game like Manor Lords, and that is why I am excited. No, I do not want to play Manor Lords because I want to conquer Europe, but maybe you want to be very powerful within your region. And one thing I think as I don't know, just as the industry develops, we're really beginning to appreciate a little bit of less is more. Sometimes you don't need as much pace, you don't need as much scale. What you do need is meaning. And sometimes when things are a bit more stripped back and slow, you actually get more meaning, and that means that a game experience can in fact stay with people more. I mean, also the obvious, one dev can't make Total War, Mount & Blade, and a Paradox Grand strategy game all in one. That certainly would be an impressive feat though. For a lot of people though, the potential of an indie beating all of those games is a very appealing thing, right? The idea of an indie beating a big AAA effort, making a better game, that is a truly amazing story. And via asymmetric competition, I think that this game can actually do that. No, I do not think that it can beat Warhammer 3 or the next, like, I don't know, Medieval 3, if that comes out in a decade. I don't think that it can beat those games on their own terms, but it doesn't have to. All it needs to do is make sure that I click Manor Lords instead of Total War whenever I hit a button in Steam, and whenever I'm doing that, I'm based on my own emotions and what each game is offering me. So it doesn't
Yeah, no, exactly.
have to be
They're not trying to do the same thing, and that's the important part. But a lot of people, I think, can fall into the trap of thinking that they have to be going head to head in the same ways, and specifically with regard to scope and scale, they're going to be pretty peeved if they don't get it through their heads that these are not the same thing. Because as you can see with this, like, we can point to Warhammer 3 and we can be frustrated with a lot of the current quality of life aspects of it. But the one thing you cannot deny is that there is a ton of content. My frustration is that it's all split up and sold separately for 16 bucks, 12 bucks. Like, that's what drives me crazy, is that you would hope you just buy the game and it has all the armies and factions and stuff, but no. However, there's at least a ton of content. And each one of these releases and stuff would normally be like its own standalone game, basically, from an indie studio. I mean, there's just so much stuff. Modeling all of these things, all the different animations, the different gameplay systems, all the balancing that goes into it. It would be crazy, crazy complicated. And they do this all the time with all these different releases. And so if you go head to head and you're trying to compare content, of course, Warhammer 3 is going to drown Manor Lords in content and potential gameplay hours and all of that. But if you're just looking for a fun game that's going to keep you engaged and not nickel and dime you, I think this goes a much further way. And I think people are actually, interestingly enough, I think gamers are starting to build in sort of a +1 or a +2 to the review score if it's just pro consumer and how it approaches things. Like, people are starting to subtract, and I think this is a great thing. They're subtracting when games handle monetization in unethical or anti-consumer ways, and they're starting to actually qualify games based on how they approach monetization. Previously, we've complained about it, but people would still buy the game. Now, people are just straight up not buying it at all if they think that the product offering is not there, or if they think that it's too greedy or too egregious, which is why you're already seeing people freak out over, like, Star Wars Outlaws having 3 different tiers of versions of the game, which is something they've been doing for like a decade. Like, this is not a new thing for Ubisoft or for, like, EA's done this a ton. Take-Two has done this a ton. Like, many other studios have had multiple tiers of deluxe editions, premium editions. Capcom has done it. All these studios and publishers have done this. Ubisoft's getting flack, for one, because it's Ubisoft, and 2, because I think a lot of people are finally just getting fed up with it. People are like, it's another big AAA game that's $70 freaking dollars, and you're still doing this stuff. Like, I think it's all just culminating now, and so there's just going to be a lot of blowback for all of these games that do it. At least it should be consistent. What would tick me off is if people are getting pissed about one company doing it and then they forgive it with other companies. It's like, if we're upset over deluxe editions and gold editions and stuff, let's be consistent about it. It's the same thing that pissed me off with, like, Dragon's Dogma 2 when people were freaking out over DLC day one. And I'm like, but you are the same guys that were raving about Resident Evil 4 Remake that did the exact same thing from Capcom 9 months ago or 10 months ago. Like, it was fine back then because you really liked that game, but this game you're not that into, so it's fine to rage about it. You know, it was stupid. Anyway.
Like for like comparison. But clearly, though, what Slavic Magic are a bit worried about here is that, well, word of a game spreads, and it can spread so much that it's no longer only really being received by the most engaged audience. And that means that this is a game, I mean, given that it's #1 on Steam, right? #1 most wishlisted game, there are a lot of people who are probably turning up to this game with not particularly well calibrated expectations, because most of the time whenever a game goes that high in Steam, it is because of pretty crazy resources, marketing, and that sort of thing. What might happen is they'll learn about this game from a clip of Legend of Total War, and they may then think, oh wow, look at that, Legend's playing it instead of Total War. It's better than Total War, this might be my dream game. And of course, that's not what Manor Lords is trying to do, it's not what Legend is trying to make happen, but I can certainly say from my personal experience as not only doing news punditry here, as I suppose you could say enthusiast press for a game, like say World of Warcraft, that you can say things and people can get an idea and an expectation that seems completely uncalibrated from what you have said. That happens so much. So obviously here the dev doesn't want people to think Total War killer and then get upset, hence this. And to illustrate a lot of this, I'm going to talk about a game with a far higher budget. Starfield. Yes.
Uh-oh. Even when I try to get away from Starfield and talk about Manor Lords, Starfield still ends up coming into the discussion. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Can't avoid it. It's just happening. Are you going to do a take on X Defiant? Disappointing. I just don't, there's nothing to really say right now. Like, we just don't know anything about it. If they do more like public betas or something, then we can play it and talk about it. But as of right now, it's just missing in action. Everybody's like, yeah, we want to see more of it, but they just have nothing. So unfortunately, there's just not much to say.
I don't know how lead researcher of Organization Connor has chosen a very smart thing. Starfield. Yes, we are tying Starfield to Manor Lords. That might seem completely unhinged, but trust me, it is pretty hinged. A lot of people played Starfield, and a lot of them played it for a lot of time. Sometimes even more than Baldur's Gate 3 at one point, but you then take a look at the Steam user reviews, and you can see that a lot of people who played Starfield really should not have played Starfield.
That's an interesting way of framing it. I remember at launch, I was trying to tell people, like, this is not No Man's Sky. This is not like Star Citizen. It is not even a Fallout 4 game. It's something else. And what it is fine, even good at times, but it's not what people are thinking it's going to be. But there were a lot of other reviewers that were like, this is a game that will age really well. I won't name any YouTubers specifically, but there were some YouTubers that were like, this is going to age really well. The more time passes, more hours put in, people are going to love it more and more and more. And what we saw was kind of the opposite happen, where it just, the more people played, the less enthused they became.
And it's not about liking specific aspects of the game or whether Starfield was disappointing for those who just got frustrated at, say, like loading screens. One of the most frequent refrains from people when you actually go through those reviews is other games achieving the fantasy of the genre better than Starfield can. So it's actually not even about a lot of the minutiae of Starfield or whatever. No, it is about that big fantasy. To many, No Man's Sky, Elite Dangerous, and Star Citizen, they're all ostensibly space games in a similar genre to Starfield, right? You can do many of the same mechanical actions, but just because you are sharing a genre with a game or sharing a mechanic with a game, that does not always translate to it being a similar experience. So Starfield was Todd Howard's dream of having low sci-fi 2000s era NASA tech as an aesthetic, and then doing, I suppose, the story of a bit of a Western frontier in space. And that is not what many of the other games that I mentioned are. And for some people who played Starfield because they wanted games more like the promise of Star Citizen, I mean, they were going to be kind of disappointed regardless, because this was not the game that they wanted. They didn't want a Bethesda game in space, and you're completely justified by not wanting that, of course. But then the question here is, why did you buy Starfield when Bethesda title in space is basically what Starfield was always going to be? And I think the answer at the core there is that the potential for Starfield goes a lot higher than generic Bethesda. You could think, oh wow, this could be my dream game. You hear Phil Spencer talk about how he loved being a space pirate in Starfield and think, oh boy, here we go, this will be really exciting. Maybe you're interested in Star Citizen, but well, you actually look at Starfield and think, all right, first person, walk about the place, fly a ship, customize a ship, and there's planets. One of these is out, the other one isn't out. Okay, I will play Starfield because I'm interested in Star Citizen and it's not fully out yet. And you're obviously then in a situation where Starfield has just competed with Star Citizen, even though it is a completely different game trying to do completely different things. Of course.
And I think this is why the clear and transparent communication from the devs is crucial. But it also relies on responsible reporting from YouTubers and streamers and stuff that are not getting everybody hyped up to irrational or unreasonable levels, which is something that no doubt happened with Starfield, where there were a lot of YouTubers out there who probably should have been a little bit more, I think they should not have been as speculative as they were, because there were a lot of people that were like, yeah, and this might be in the game. And the fact that there's no vehicles when traveling on planet surfaces, yeah, that's a little strange. So it probably is in the game. They just haven't announced it yet. And it was very irresponsible because it encouraged people to fill in the blanks themselves, even when it didn't end up being true. And then they got disappointed and frustrated by it. And I think unfairly blamed Bethesda for not delivering on something that Bethesda was never going to deliver on. But at the same time, Bethesda probably should have communicated more clearly what the game was going to be.
I'll also add that I don't think that Starfield is successful at what it tries to do, unfortunately. But basically, Slavic Magic is trying to avoid that problem here. They're basically trying to set expectations early. That Manor Lords isn't here to kill Total War, that's not here to compete with Crusader Kings 3 or anything like that on a one-to-one fashion. It's just its own thing. And where it is in the Venn diagram and your own interests, that is what it is, but don't expect it to directly compete with the games that you want to play it instead of. Expect it to indirectly compete. Do that, and I think with Manor Lords, a lot of us will be having a really, really good time. I mean, I love the Total War games. Well, it's a complicated relationship. Mountain Blade. I can't go near Mountain Blade as a rule. It just can't happen. Put too many hours into all of the Mountain Blades. It is too destructive to my life. So, I mean, and Pharaoh, big childhood game. Like, Manor Lords is exactly what I think I want from it, and that's very much as a genre enthusiast. But it is interesting to see here an example of a developer maybe looking at Sean Murray, maybe looking at Starfield and thinking, okay, I actually see a problem on the horizon, because ultimately I don't think the dev would have done this if they weren't a little bit spooked at some of the chatter that they're seeing about their own game.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I think of hype as sort of like a big hill, and you as the developer are on like a skateboard. And so you initially start going down the hill and you're going faster and faster and faster. And you're like, oh my God, oh, this is cool. Wow. Oh, this is really cool. But pretty quickly, it gets a little bit out of control and you start sort of freaking out, because as you pick up speed and go faster and faster, the wheels start to wobble, the board starts to shake, you start to get unstable, and you're not really sure how you're supposed to stop. And if you hit, exactly, Mended, if you hit a single pothole, if you hit a little tiny rock, the smallest little issue, you're gonna crash and it could destroy everything. It could be devastating. I think that's what can happen with a lot of games, where it's, by many accounts, a really solid game, but you start picking up all that speed and then you get a little hiccup here where you don't have this feature that people thought you were gonna have, or maybe performance isn't great on this platform, or whatever it is. And all of a sudden you get thrown off and the whole thing just collapses and spins and spins and spins. And, you know, it's kind of like Jedi Survivor, where Jedi Survivor, great game, started picking up a lot of steam, but it got railed across the coals because performance was really, really bad at launch. They hit that pebble, they hit that rock. I'd say it's more of a rock than a pebble. And they got thrown off the board and they go tumbling down and get injured. And they're like, what happened? They start yelling at the hill for doing it, even though the hill was something they chose to go down at the end of the day. And with this, it's like, I think if you can start to slow yourself down on that descent, even though it's fun to go really fast, and maybe if your ultimate goal is to see how far you can possibly go, yeah, if you go super fast and you can keep your balance, you're going to go very, very far. But there's a lot of risk involved with that if you can't deliver and stay stable through the entire ride. The analogy is a little wobbly itself. But with this, I think the developer is doing it the best way he can, which is to just simply communicate, try to be real with everybody, and not leave much up to the imagination. Because if there are gaps, people will fill in those gaps for sake of hype, and you can't do that. And I'm sure if he's like, the thing that scares me the most is that he mentioned Kingdom Come Deliverance. And if he had to bring that up, that tells me that people have mentioned that to him, which is horrifying, because no part of Manor Lords looks anything like Kingdom Come other than being vaguely medieval. Not even vaguely, it's medieval. And so for people to think that they were going to get a similar experience from this as Kingdom Come Deliverance is ridiculous. But that's what happens when people just start to fill it in. It's wild. Anyway, here's a link to the video. Go sub to Bellular. Bellular. I gotta figure out how he pronounces it. I sound like an idiot every time I say it. He took my thing.